All right, so hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our May ORCID US community call on the topic of ORCID for graduate students. This was one of the topics that many people voted on in our December survey. Just a few logistics before we get started. We have been linking the notes and agenda document in the chat. I'll put it one more time just for anyone who just joined us. Please feel free to go in there and add your name to the attendees list. You'll also see that we have an agenda laid out and we're going to be taking notes, so that will all be shared after the session. Right now, your microphone is muted, but when we get to the discussion section, we'll allow everyone to unmute. But please feel free to type things into the chat if anything comes to mind that you want to share or ask. The slides are linked in the notes document. The recording will be shared after. And the auto transcriptions are turned on right now, so you should be able to either turn those on or off in your Zoom screen as you wish. If we go to the next slide, just a little standard reminder about our community call norms. Basically, the idea behind these community calls is just to bring everyone together for a respectful discussion. If you do have questions, make sure to ask them, seek clarification, be receptive to feedback from others. We haven't really had any problems with this on these calls, but just understand that different people might have different perspectives or expertise that you might not be aware of. So just be open-minded and respectful. Let's see what's on the next slide. Okay, so just some introductions. I'm Sheila Rabin. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm the program leader for our persistent identifier communities at Lyrasis, which include the ORCID US community and the Lyrasis DataCite US community. We also have my colleague Paolo Guhilde, who's our ORCID US community specialist, who will be speaking next. And then our guest speaker for today is Willa Tavernier at Indiana University Bloomington. Willa is the Research Impact and Open Scholarship Librarian. So Willa is going to be sharing her wisdom from Indiana University Bloomington. So thank you, Willa, for being our guest speaker. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paolo to give us an overview of ORCID for grad students, so we can all be starting from kind of the same page.
Thank you, Sheila. Hello, everyone. Again, so I'm Paolo Guhilde. Really, my portion here is just to kind of give you a little bit of overview of our topic today, which is ORCID for graduate students. So one of the things that we're going to take a look at is just kind of looking at the benefits of ORCID for graduate students. This is pretty much the same as the benefits for everyone else. So, your faculty, your researchers, anyone that's using ORCID. So really what we're thinking of is that our grad students are also researchers. So we do encourage students to get ORCID IDs because it helps them with name disambiguation. We kind of are very, very familiar with this in terms of some other people will have the same name as we do. As much as we like to think that, I probably have the most unique name, but there's probably another Paolo out there pretty much with the same name and last name. So with this, ORCID really helps identify one individual from the other. So that's kind of a big part of that. Graduate students also benefit from ORCID by building their digital identity. So oftentimes our graduate students are part of research laboratory, for example. This is especially true in STEM areas, and and a lot of these groups or laboratories will be also publishing their work throughout. So it's not really an unusual kind of situation where we have graduate students that are also our researchers. So with this, we are giving our graduate students the credit for their work. throughout their career as a graduate student. With this also, we have students that are applying for grants. Some of them could be applying for, say, an NSF grant or an NIH grant. So one of these things is basically, in a way, help them also streamline that process. It saves them time. So for example, you can create BioSketch for your grant application through Science CV. That's kind of an easy way and an easy process for our graduate students to create that portion of their grant applications. And speaking of grants also is that having an ORCID ID will also help prepare our students with NSPM 33 or the National Security Presidential Memo 33. And this really, we've been talking about this a few times this year already, and this will be part of our discussion all throughout this year as well. But this one really sort of like had an impact on disclosures for research funding. So that's just kind of some general kind of benefits for our graduate students. So aside from, of course, outreach to our graduate students, how can our organizations leverage ORCID in this area? So as part of your ORCID membership, ORCID US membership, of course, you have access to 5 ORCID Premium APIs. So these 5 ORCID APIs are the ones that you can use to integrate ORCID with your local systems. So these APIs can make the connection from graduate students to institutions, and also it can make that connections between your institution, the graduate students, and external organizations as well. We've talked about a little bit about the grant funding through different organizations externally, but also publishing areas as well. So those are the kind of connections that are happening externally beyond kind of our organizations or institutions. One example of a workflow for this, for our graduate students is really through through electronic thesis and dissertations. So I think we're quite familiar with this already. So ideally, graduate students connect their ORCID ID upon submissions of their ETD into the organization's platform or IR. We already know that some ETD platforms in the field have a manual field for basically entering your ORCID ID. So such as ProQuest ETD and Vario. Now, one of the things that we kind of need to make sure that we are actually getting authenticated ORCID IDs. So the manual entry for that is not really the best option in terms of entering ORCID IDs or getting authenticated IDs. From time to time, we do make mistakes on the numbers, for example, or we kind of mistype something. So we're not really getting the correct or authenticated ID in that area. So that's kind of what's happening with ProQuest, not necessarily that that there's just that possibility of perhaps entering a wrong ORCID ID. Very on the other hand, in here, even though you're also entering it as a manual entry, there is a little bit of functionality where it can be validated through basically looking at the name as well as the ORCID ID of the individuals. So those are just kind of areas that things that would be kind of useful, right? But some IRs as well are already have some functionalities. I think we kind of know that Esploro has some kind of functionality with entering ORCID IDs. So that's one area that's kind of available there. So a lot of this workflows is really kind of important in terms of working with your graduate students and getting them the ORCID ID that they need. So one of the things that you can also kind of leverage this is that if you are assigning DOIs to ETDs, for example, you can actually include your ORCID ID in the DOI metadata. So that way, that can be added through a system later on through a search and link like DataCite. So that's another way that that can be done to make that process a little bit streamlined for our graduate students, because there's just so many processes sometimes, and a lot of these things could get kind of push aside or kind of, just basically kind of we forget about them. But adding some of those metadata into the DOI will help save time for our graduate students to get those works that they have on their ORCID record. So generally, this is just kind of a really quick overview of a lot of the workflows that could possibly happen through the different systems, as well as an ORCID workflow that really benefits our graduate students. So before I rumble even more, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to Willa so she can talk more about what's going on with their work at Indiana University.
Thanks, Paolo. I'm just gonna share my presentation. And hopefully everyone can see that. All right. So this is just gonna be a brief overview, and I should clarify that this is for Indiana University Bloomington. IU is a whole system with a number of branch campuses. We don't have a system-wide ORCID membership. Bloomington is a member, and we also have one other campus, IUPUI is also a member. So I'm just gonna talk a bit about the initial steps in joining ORCID and each outreach around that. And then I'm gonna focus on the graduate student audience in particular. After that, I just have a few prompt questions that hopefully we can discuss as a community of practice around use of ORCID by graduate students. So IU Bloomington joined ORCID in August 2018. I joined IU Bloomington in September 2018. So one of the first things that I was sort of tasked with is making a plan for how we use ORCID. So it was all new to everyone. I am in the scholarly communication department, and right now my portfolio is research impact and open scholarship. So I primarily deal with ORCID, keeping up with our membership, and outreach to the departments and schools and other communities. So there were a few things that that we did. Okay. So in making a plan, the things that I looked at was what's our overall goal in using ORCID, and it took there was a bit of learning that had to take place for our institution. So one of the things I did was, in that first day, I think I attended every ORCID community showcase that was available just to see the other implementations. And I recommend that. It's really useful. When we started to have deeper discussions, I was able to point to use cases of how other institutions had used ORCID and what would be needed at our institution to be able to most effectively use ORCID. And then in terms of outreach, ORCID has an outreach toolkit on its website. And also, if you want additional material like the lockups and stuff, you can reach out. We have reached out to ORCID, and they've provided us with that so that we can make sure that all our outreach materials are properly branded. So we wanted to focus on starting to promote ORCID registration. And so we did a lot of tabling. We focused on sort of events. One of those regular events was the graduate student orientation, but we also worked with other audiences through our Center of Excellence for Women in Technology and through the Office of the Vice President for Faculty Affairs for new faculty orientation and things like that. The ORCID member reports helped, those monthly reports which it used to be emailed in the newsletter. Now there's a portal where you can just access it anytime you want. Gave us an idea of what ORCID looked like at our university, who was already using it, and which schools were using it most heavily. And in our case, that really has always been our School of Public Health and biology. And then we started having discussions about deeper integration with collect and connect systems that we had seen in other implementations at other institutions. So those discussions started at the end of 2019. And we know what happened next. So the past couple of years, it meant that progress was slowed, but what ORCID was able to do for us was put us in direct touch with other institutions that had similar platforms to us, so that had repositories, that maybe had medical schools, and how they implemented it. But so baby steps first. After we created our LibGuide, we pushed the digital measures integration so that faculty could know that they could pull their information straight from ORCID into their end of year report. After that, we did our open journal system, that's from the PKP network. And that was equally being promoted by the library and being asked for by our journal editors. So that was the next step that we did. And right now we're looking at integrating it completely with our identity management system to provide more opportunities for schools and departments to build downstream applications as well as the library. Because we have a really sort of big picture view of what we want to do with it, and that will make it easier. Right. So in terms of graduate student registration, the way we looked at it is it's a contribution to the pedified semantic web of the future. And by that, I mean, there are all these different types of unique identifiers. We have the DOI, we have the Ringgold, the DOI for articles, works. We have the Ringgold IDs for institutions. There's also, research organization registries and things like that. So the vision is that in the future, someone would be able to easily identify from a cited work, not only just a permanent location for the work itself, but to clearly and unambiguously identify the authors, and through that see their other works and just follow the network of related research. And so that's what I mean by the pedified web. So one of the things that I looked at in doing the strategic planning was this article called Academic Libraries and Technology, an Environmental Scan Toward Future Possibility. And that was written in 2017. And the author, and I'm apologizing in advance if I don't pronounce this name correctly, but it's Ujwishin, Ujwishin. I'll actually drop the name of the article and stuff in the chat, and that might be easier. So there's so much more information out there, and with the profusion of that information, deduplication of not only data and literature, but names also becomes important. That's one of the points that article was making. And so the larger idea is to give the author, the work, the piece of data, a permanent internet location so that it can be easier for other researchers to find the author, quote the relevant work, reuse the data set or cite it for an experiment. And this data will remain the same for all stakeholders. And so it also contributes to the transparency of research, so transparency and reliability. So we knew in advance that graduate students might not immediately understand all of the benefits for ORCID, especially if they've just started, and we're doing this at orientation, if they're not publishing yet, or if they're not already part of a lab, but we saw it as a contribution to the future PIDified research universe and research network. So other places besides graduate student orientation that we did sort of ORCID drives for ORCID registration was a Research in the Margins graduate student symposium that was sponsored by our local Center for Statistical Research. We also did the Haystack Scholars Workshop, and that's a digital humanities program. We also did a workshop with our Graduate Mentoring Center. So through these outreach efforts, we had 102 students sign up over 6 tabling events. And the very first time we did it, we just had a piece of paper with lines for people to write their names and email addresses and a single computer for them to sign up. By the last time we did it, we had it much more streamlined, because I can say that without reservation, that first time was a bit of a disaster. There were way more students interested in doing it than we had catered for. So by the most recent time we did it, which was this year, in January, we had a whole bank of computers. We had a little Qualtrics form set up that they would put in their email address, their IU email address, and when they clicked, it would take them to the Indiana University ORCID sign-up page, because between 2018 and now, we've also been able to do the sign-up through your institution. So as an earlier level of integration to the eventual vision that we see. So we had 102 students sign up. We had handouts in different languages, which was a definite benefit. And again, those are provided by ORCID. We just needed to print them out. So Mandarin, Hindi, Spanish, French, and the students immediately, they saw their language, they picked it up, they read what it was about, and they were interested in doing it. We also had a handful of consultations coming out of the tabling events. So in 2019, this would have been after we did the very first graduate student orientation. We did have 3 requests for consultations for how they could use ORCID. And these were all female students. We had 2 US-based students and 1 international student. So only one of these students has so far been effectively able to use ORCID. She published through our library publishing program. And as I mentioned, we have it integrated with OJS. So she was able to sign up for her ORCID and turn on the search and link wizard for both Crossref and DataCite, so that she could pull in that article that she published. And she was from the School of Education. We have another student from the School of Education, and she was from India, and she had already published. And what she was saying is that she couldn't find a way to pull in her information, her publication information automatically. She had actually published a book chapter, and so they didn't have an ORCID workflow, that particular book publisher. And the other student was from African American and African Diaspora Studies, and she was really excited to see that some of the journals she was interested in publishing in allowed you to sign in with ORCID. But again, this wasn't in all of the journal workflows that she was interested in. So just in this year, after we did the most recent one, we sent out a quick survey to all of the students who we'd collected information from over the 3 years. Now, some of those students have graduated already, of course, but at least one of the students who already graduated did reply. So we just had 2 questions. Have you used your ORCID since you created it? And we listed a number of different ways that you might have used it, and it was a simple yes, no answer. And then the second question was them to select all that apply, whether they'd like to essentially receive more information, whether or not they'd like to receive more information about ORCID and in what form. So we distributed this to the 102 email addresses that we had. We received 16 responses. I would say, even though that level of response, like essentially 16%, might be a little low, we received all those responses within days, some within an hour of sending out this survey. So the people who did responded quickly. Only 5 of the graduate students reported that they had used ORCID after initially registering for an ORCID ID. And just anecdotally, in talking to the graduate students, in conversations and even at some of these events, what we found is that right now the graduate students tend to engage more with LinkedIn and building personal websites. But we really feel that when we get to the point of integrating with our identity management system, and also if we could integrate leverage in our repositories. Right now we are using DSpace, and right now the DSpace integration unfortunately is not for authenticated ORCID IDs. And Sheila, you can jump me in if that's not correct, but you did connect us with a couple of universities that had tried this. So that integration right now is not the greatest, but the way that we plan to do it is that once we integrate with our identity management system, students can then use our logon when they're depositing in our repository, and that would allow us to share that information back and forth with authenticated ORCID IDs. So students contribute their dissertations to our repositories and other great literature like posters, conference presentations, etc. So we think when we have a deeper integration, we can demonstrate the value of this even more to our graduate students. And then in terms of their responses to the second question, 3 were interested if there would be a national webinar about ORCID for graduate students. 6 wanted to just receive some links to more resources. 2 people wanted to schedule a consultation. We've had one of those consultations already. And 8 said none of the above. 1 person didn't respond. So just to highlight 2 of the students, of the 5 students who did use their ORCID after creating it. So we had a public health PhD student. She had done her master's at UT Austin. She had already published. And we had a lobby day in the School of Public Health where we just sat in their lobby. The school itself advertised it for us. And so she signed up during this lobby day tabling event. And she really spent time. She was serious. She understood the benefit of it. She'd heard about it before. She'd heard about it at her previous institution. She wasn't sure whether she had an ORCID or not. And so we had about a 45-minute sit down with her, actually. We searched to see if she had an ORCID. We were able to determine that she didn't. She created the ORCID. We went through and we did the search and link wizard with both Crossref and DataCite. She was able to see that it pulled in her publication information. Immediately after that, she wanted to create her biosketch, and she was very pleased with the results of using ORCID to populate her biosketch. And she continued to follow up afterwards. So we sent her the our LibGuide on request, and our LibGuide, has in not just text-based information, but some very helpful videos, short videos that have been created by ORCID that are useful to researchers, both graduate students and faculty. And then we had another student who was a library science master's student. And the way she saw it, she had already created some gray literature that was in the institutional repository of her previous institution where she had gone as an undergrad. And so she did a lot of this on her own in terms of using the search and link wizards to pull in her information that already had a DOI attached to it from her repository. And she said that she saw that ORCID would be really important, one, for future publishing, but also for future practice as a librarian. She saw it as being really useful to know how to use this as a practical matter so that in her librarian practice, eventually she would be able to guide other people through it. And her primary use for ORCID was to use this as a portable CV to be easily be able to send people to one page to see the sort of work that she had already done. And I can definitely attest to that. I did the same thing as a graduate student. I was able to point to this in my interviewing at Indiana University, to some of the things that I had in our institutional repository, as well as things on the open web that I manually added to my ORCID record. So I just wanted to highlight those two examples of how graduate students find ORCID useful in particular. So the sort of takeaways that we've seen is that students who are publishing are actively thinking of publishing, are more likely to use ORCID after having created or registered for an ORCID ID. And we also found that there's a bit of disciplinary difference, just like reflected in our member reports for who's using ORCID the most. Those in the sciences using it are able to use it more effectively than those in the humanities. So a lot of folks in the humanities, they're writing books or book chapters or encyclopedia entries for which ORCID adoption in publishing workflows is not as robust as it is in scientific journals when people are submitting articles. So in terms of future directions, as I mentioned throughout this talk, we're working on full integration with our identity management system, and we think it'll definitely be easier to demonstrate use cases. We do have plans to integrate it with some internal library systems that we've built and show departments how this can be used to get sort of actionable insight out of ORCID records. And with that, here's some questions that I thought we could have a discussion about today, whether you want to put that in the chat or just unmute. Or if you have questions of your own, I'm happy to chat about those as well. And so the first question that I sort of want to throw out there is, for this community of practice of people who are interested in ORCID for graduate students, what's your greatest worry, or what do you see as your greatest challenge in terms of promoting ORCID among graduate students?
Thank you, Willa. Yeah, I just made it so that everyone you can unmute. You can also turn your video on if you want. So feel free to chime in. Love to hear everyone's thoughts. Also, one thing that I meant to do earlier and I forgot, so I'm just going to do it real quickly right now, is a poll just to see where everyone is at with ORCID for grad students at your organization. So you should see a poll up where you can kind of select the status, just so we can kind of get an idea of where everyone's coming from.
So Michelle Brown has raised her hand. So Michelle,
Yeah,
sorry, Brown has raised
Sure.
their hand.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you. Yeah, happens all the time. And then I say something and then, oh, okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. So the question, engagement with grad students in ORCID, it's sort of an interesting process. Early on their matriculation, during orientation, I try to press, this is an important part of your scholarly profile, add it now because you'll be using it later. If they already have a publication prior, it's something they can link to, just sort of an awareness. Usually they don't understand that they'll need it for publishing. Since they already don't have their own grant history, they're not really using it yet. But I also mentioned that you're doing posters, presentations. It allows you to add a QR code to your poster so it points back to a known location where somebody might find your other work. It's sort of an engagement cycle. It's not quite part of the entire flow. What's helpful is we're finding publishers requesting at least the corresponding authors include their ORCID. I'd like to see publishers request that all of the authors submit their ORCIDs. That's not necessarily the case for every publisher. It's the kind of service that really expresses itself only in the use and then looking at it in perspective. It's hard to tell somebody ahead of time, this is going to make your life easier. I can only give you examples of other people that I've helped with it. If you do this, then you're going to save yourself headaches in the future. And more often, they'll just not think about it. So it's tough to get them into the idea of configure it early, sort of automate it as much as possible, and then remember to use it when it's appropriate. And then you'll be surprised when you absolutely need it. Postdocs are a little easier to work with because they may already have an established body of work, and they're very much interested in how to onboard their data into maybe another system. So if they were to have another position or submit for a grant or a biosketch, they already have a body of work that they can use to fill those machine readable systems.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I'm wondering, you want to do the poll results now, Sheila? Because there were quite a few people who said they're already using it in graduate student workflows. So some of those people might want to share their experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody can see the poll results. So yeah, it looks like we had 9 people saying they're actively using ORCID for grad student related workflows. 18 people said they're interested in using ORCID for grad students, but really haven't been able to do anything yet. 16 people said you've done outreach to grad students, but aren't really using the ORCID API in any workflows. And then some people don't know or don't have grad students, which is totally fine. But I think this kind of reflects what I had suspected, which is most people are interested in it, they want to do it, but Willa, from your presentation and kind of sharing your experience, and just also Mitchell, everything that you just mentioned, it might be a little bit harder to get grad students to see the value or even be able to get value from having an ORCID ID if they're not actively, interacting with systems or organizations that are, allowing them to use their ORCID ID to like import data or what have you. So, but there is definitely some potential there, I think. And for those who are actively using ORCID, we definitely love to hear from you about what you're doing and how that's going.
So I just want to jump in and just address one of the things that came up in the chat from a student possibly asking about moving institutions. And thanks to those who answer that it's tied to a person and not to a particular institution. So just one piece of advice I'd like to add is that you can have more than one email associated with your ORCID ID. So always have a personal email as well as your institutional email, so that as you move institutions, you don't lose access to be able to, for example, say reset your password or something like that. And so I created my ORCID while I was a graduate student at the University of Iowa with my University of Iowa email address because they had a collect and connect system. I moved to IU, but I also had my personal Gmail attached to that. So it wasn't a problem to just go in, add my IU email, choose which email I wanted to be primary, and just keep on maintaining my ORCID record. Yeah, and John has posted in the chat that you don't have to make your personal email public. You can keep it private in ORCID. So that's just a sort of backup for you. So really interesting also in the chat, someone was talking about an OJS workflow with a journal that graduate students submit to. I don't know, I'd invite you if you would like to, if you want to chat more about that, to unmute if you want to.
Hi, I'm Diana Hagan. I'm at the University of Florida, and I'm with our Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, our cooperative extension. So we have a number of graduate and postdoc student contributors to our publications. And so we collect the ORCIDs on submission, and then we also push those publications to a public site. So the ORCIDs are also available on the public site. And I use that as an opportunity also to recommend ORCIDs when there's name changes or other reasons why they might want to have an ORCID. So that seems to be a very valuable experience and mechanism for bringing people on board with ORCIDs. I'm also finding that we have past students that we have the ORCIDs for, and we're able to see their current activities. So, you know, when you have a student that moves on, you can't track what they're doing. So you don't know, you can't collaborate with that person anymore. You don't even know where they are necessarily. When the ORCID is attached to them 5-10 years later, you can still interact with that person. It's very valuable for the organization.
Yes, I think that's a great point. And there's actually an ORCID US community showcase with a medical school that uses it specifically for that purpose, because so many of their graduate student education is funded. So they use it to sort of figure into their assessment of return on investment. So that's a great point. So I just wanted to throw another question out there, or a couple of questions. Are there ways that you think either institutions or ORCID can improve ORCID use among graduate students? So the one I threw out in my presentation is that I definitely think once we have a better integration, it will make more sense for the graduate students, especially with our repository platform. But I'd like to hear if anyone else has other ideas for improving uptake.
Sure. I'll go again. I'm sorry, I didn't lower my hand before. Mitchell Brown, University of California, Irvine. A suggestion that faculty have had is when the students come in, we assign them a university credentials for their email. We also assign them storage capacity on institutional servers. Let's also at that same time coordinate ORCID identifier so that they also include their ORCIDs not as a substitute for their student IDs or any kind of library identifiers, but also include ORCID as part of the regular sort of student work that they do. So they get used to doing that. Certain laboratory environments within the University of California have better adoption because their work environments really require closer reporting of results. So the national laboratories at Livermore and Lawrence Berkeley, given that it's a government institution lab, have a different sort of requirement. I think the University of California, San Francisco, which is predominantly a postdoc medical biomedical research organization, education institution, they have a different framework where the expectation is you can, as an employer, maybe give direction to have people identify their work more specifically. Increasingly, it seems that the opportunity to attach persistent identifiers to research tools, say mass spectrometry devices or observatory equipment, or Irvine has a mouse laboratory. So if you're doing genetic studies and you need a mouse line and you're doing work, you can actually have one developed for you. And as an institution, they wanted to be able to track publications and grants associated with that particular research unit on campus. ORCID has the opportunity to do that. So part of the strategy is to maybe make it as ubiquitous as an email address, maybe include it in your ID, but that's a little formal. The idea is to lift it to more daily usage. But this falls under sort of university policy, and faculty senate have to approve that. And honestly, they're always a little bit skittish about how much information is being shared with these systems. What I try to recommend to them is that all of the information that's in your ORCID profile is already publicly available. It's things that would be accessible in other types of searches. It's just aggregated and authenticated to a particular individual.
That makes sense. At IU, we've had the same sort of requests from, well, what we group them together and call them is core facilities, coming through so that they can be able to track when people use those facilities when they eventually publish, so that those facilities can say, hey, here's our contribution to the advancement of research, advancement of science. This person or this group or this lab used our equipment, and this contributed to this particular piece of research. So I definitely second that. And Sheila's put a note in the chat about some ORCID resources around that. Another suggestion we have here in the chat is building it into the advisor process. Thanks for contributing that, Diana. The other thing that I think I would add, so a lot of the publishers of humanities work, whether it's books, journals, or encyclopedia, are the same publishers of scientific work, but there also may be smaller scholarly societies involved, and maybe publishing independently, or maybe have different, it's a more sort of varied landscape, I believe, in the humanities. So one of the things that I would look forward to is finding a way, is ORCID maybe looking at a way to sort of do some sort of environmental scan of ORCID use in the humanities, and touching base with that wider community of humanities publishers, scholarly societies, etc., to see how they can incorporate ORCID in their workflow. I mean, definitely for books, a book chapter can have a DOI. What are the barriers? Is it cost? Is it that these publishers maybe are smaller, they don't have as many resources? How can those of us who are interested in the Pidified universe make it easier for them to adopt ORCID into their workflows? What do their workflows look like? And what barriers do they currently face? Because I do think that that's sort of a bit of a dark spot in ORCID use, and that's just anecdotal. But if if ORCID was able to do some sort of scan to provide an evidence base to see how that is going, I think that would greatly contribute to improvement of use. And so there's some other comments in the chat. Yeah, similar to us, one of the limitations is the integration, and we have a funder in here that's planning to require ORCIDs. What else do we have? And a bit of talk about orientation being having a training module that's assigned to all students during orientation. And I do take the point that it is, it's a hard sell at orientation, especially because they're just coming in, right? But that is the time when you're most likely to have access to the greatest number of graduate students all at one time. So even though it may be a little bit of a difficult sell, I still think it is somewhat effective. Another thing that we have at IU is a full day workshop called Supercharge Your Dissertation. And that is usually attended by PhD students. And they have a much more publishing focus. Again, you have access to a large group of graduate students that you wouldn't normally have access to. So that's another area of outreach that we do. Okay. And so Allison is seeking feedback about their plans from the funder side to require ORCIDs for all project personnel, including grad students on our funded awards. I would definitely thumbs up to that. And Christina has her hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, this is Christina Miskey. I'm at UNLV, and related to what you were just talking about with the orientation and things, here we have a boot camp that our grad students and PhD students go through, that there's like a week-long series of workshops that the libraries works with the grad college. And I teach an ORCID introductory workshop for that, and it's usually pretty successful. I get about 8 to 12 students each semester, and they all seem pretty excited about creating an ORCID and things like that, because they're going through like their thesis and dissertation process, and they're thinking about publishing and everything. So I found that's a pretty great way to kind of interact with students. But it's smaller, but it's still an effective so far.
Really appreciate that share. That's a great point. And then there's a question in the chat about use of the affiliation manager by professional societies. They seem like a potential influence for ORCID adoption. I actually think that's a great idea. But I don't know what the membership in ORCID by professional societies look like. Maybe Sheila, you have some more information?
Yeah, so there are many societies that are ORCID members, mostly because they're involved in publishing. So, societies that are publishing journals and stuff like that. They tend to be direct members with ORCID, so not as many are members of our ORCID US community. And I'm not aware of any societies using the affiliation manager tool yet, in the US at least. For us, the universities have been adopting it primarily. That's not to say they won't use it. They're just not using it yet. The affiliation manager tool just came out not even a year ago. It came out like last summer. So we're still, planning to see some build up there. But yeah, I think that would be an excellent use case for the affiliation manager, is like adding those memberships, society memberships to people's ORCID records. So yeah. Oh, I will point out what Paolo just put in the chat. There are some use cases from Canada that might be helpful. So there's an organization in Canada that's using the affiliation manager to add that kind of data to people's ORCID records. Also in the notes document, there is another example from Canada that's linked up in the helpful resources section at the top of the notes document from University of British Columbia. Basically, there's a recording that you can watch, but essentially they're coming kind of from a different angle where they are really heavily promoting ORCID to faculty so that they can use data from faculty's ORCID records to help grad students find mentors and stuff like that. So getting their activities and keywords. So they're kind of going a roundabout way of like promoting it to faculty for the purpose of helping grad students find who they want to work with. So that's another interesting approach. I could keep talking literally all day about this too. So I realize also that we're getting close on time. So definitely if you have anything you want us to follow up with you on, put it in the chat. Also email us because we want to make sure we can kind of continue these discussions and include everything in the notes. And we'll, put this information and everything in the discussion forum too. But thank you again so much, everyone, for joining this discussion. Thank you so much, Willa, for sharing all of your insight. I really feel like we could talk about just this topic all day, maybe several days. So, if any additional thoughts come up, anything else that you want to share with others or questions that you want to pose to the community, feel free to do that in the discussion forum or contact Paolo and I, and we can kind of facilitate more communication around this too. I'm putting our email address into the chat. Yep. So thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Recording.